You know what's wild? When Americans think about empires, they picture the British Raj, the Spanish conquistadors, maybe the Romans if they paid attention in history class. But ask them about American colonies and you'll get blank stares. We don't have colonies, they'll say. We fought a revolution against colonialism. Well, buckle up, because today we're taking a trip through America's very own empire, one that spans the Pacific and the Caribbean, controls millions of people who can't vote for their own president, and has been quietly operating in plain sight for over a century. I'm talking about Puerto Rico, Guam, the US Virgin Islands, American Samoa, the Northern Mariana Islands, and yes, we're going to talk about Hawaii. Because that story is even wilder than you think. By the end of this video, you'll understand how the United States built an empire that it refuses to call an empire, how these territories are fighting for self-determination, and why this matters right now in 2026. Let's get into it. To understand America's colonial present, we need to rewind to 1898, a year that would fundamentally transform the United States from a continental republic into a global empire. The Spanish-American War lasted just 10 weeks, but its consequences echo through today. Historians often call it a splendid little war, a phrase coined by Secretary of State John Hay, and it perfectly captures the casual imperialism of the era. The United States, flexing its industrial muscles, decided it wanted what Spain had: Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. But here's where it gets interesting. The Teller Amendment, passed right before the war, explicitly stated that the US wouldn't annex Cuba. Congress wanted to look like liberators, not colonizers. So what did they do? They took everywhere else instead. The Treaty of Paris, signed December 10th, 1898, handed over Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States for the bargain price of $20 million. About $700 million today. Spain literally sold these territories and their people like real estate. But wait, weren't Filipinos and Puerto Ricans fighting their own wars of independence against Spain? Absolutely. The United States simply inserted itself as the new colonial master. In the Philippines, this led to a brutal war of conquest from 1899 to 1902, and sporadic fighting until 1913 that killed between 200,000 and 750,000 Filipinos, many from disease and famine caused by American scorched earth tactics. General Jacob Smith infamously ordered his troops to turn the island of Samar into a howling wilderness and kill everyone over the age of 10 capable of bearing arms. Meanwhile, the US also annexed Hawaii in 1898, but that's not part of the Spanish-American War story. That's its own special flavor of colonialism, which we'll get to in a minute. Now here's where American empire gets legally weird. When you colonize millions of people, you face the constitutional problem. Do these people get constitutional rights? Can they vote? Are they citizens? The answer came through a series of Supreme Court decisions between 1901 and 1922 known as the Insular Cases. And friends, these cases are still the law of the land today. The basic ruling? The Constitution doesn't fully apply to territories. These places are foreign to the United States in a domestic sense, a phrase so contradictory it could make your brain melt. Justice Henry Billings Brown wrote that full constitutional rights shouldn't extend to territories inhabited by alien races who couldn't understand Anglo-Saxon principles. Yes, you read that right. The legal foundation of America's territorial system is explicitly racist. These decisions created a two-tier system. Incorporated territories destined for statehood, like Alaska and Hawaii eventually became, and unincorporated territories that could be held indefinitely without a path to statehood or independence. Constitutional scholar Juan Torroella, himself a Puerto Rican federal judge, called the Insular Cases the legal cornerstone of American colonialism, and argued they're just as wrong as Plessy v. Ferguson, the case that legalized segregation. Think about this. In 2026, over 3.5 million American citizens live under a framework created by an openly racist Supreme Court justices in 1901. That's not ancient history, that's now. America, fuck yeah! Let's talk about Hawaii, because this might be the most egregious example of American colonialism, and it happened before the Spanish-American War. In the 1890s, Hawaii wasn't some unclaimed territory. It was a sovereign kingdom recognized by the United States, Britain, France, and other nations. The Kingdom of Hawaii had its own constitution, elected legislature, and international treaties. Enter the sugar barons. American businessmen, descendants of missionaries ironically, had built massive sugar plantations in Hawaii using imported labor. They made fortunes but faced a problem. Hawaiian sugar faced tariffs when exported to the US, but if Hawaii were part of the United States, that sugar would be tariff-free. So what did they do? They overthrew the government. On January 17, 1893, a group of American and European businessmen, backed by the US Marines from the USS Boston, staged a coup against Queen Liliuokalani. The Queen, facing American military force and wanting to avoid bloodshed, yielded her authority. Not to the conspirators, but to the United States government, expecting that President Grover Cleveland would restore her to the throne. Here's what makes this even more incredible. President Cleveland actually investigated and concluded that the overthrow was illegal. In a message to Congress in December 1893, Cleveland called it an act of war, conducted without authorization, and said the provisional government existed only because of American military intervention. But Congress ignored him. The sugar interests were too powerful. By 1898, with a new president, William McKinley, and the Spanish-American War creating imperial fever, Hawaii was annexed via a joint resolution of Congress, not even a treaty, which would have required 2/3 Senate approval. Queen Liliuokalani herself wrote, "O honest Americans, as Christians, hear me for my downtrodden people. Their form of government is as dear to them as yours is precious to you. Quite as warmly as you love your country, so they love theirs." To this day, native Hawaiian sovereignty activists argue that the annexation was illegal under international law and that Hawaii remains an occupied nation. The Apology Resolution passed by Congress in 1993 acknowledged the overthrow as illegal but offered no material restitution. Hawaii became a state in 1959. But here's the thing, that statehood vote didn't include an option for independence, and it didn't distinguish between native Hawaiians and settler populations who had no ancestral connection to the islands. It's like asking both the colonized and the colonizers to vote on whether colonization should continue.
I favor statehood for Puerto Rico.
That the people of Puerto Rico should have the right to determine their own political future.
When the people of Puerto Rico make a clear decision, my administration will stand by you.
Let's move to Puerto Rico, where 3.2 million American citizens live without voting representation in Congress or the ability to vote for president. Since 1898, Puerto Rico has been in constitutional limbo. Puerto Ricans became US citizens in 1917 via the Jones-Shafroth Act, just in time to be drafted into World War I. How convenient. But citizenship didn't mean equality. Congress has absolute power over Puerto Rico under the Territory Clause of the Constitution. It can impose laws without Puerto Rican consent, and it has, repeatedly. Puerto Rico can't negotiate its own trade agreements, can't declare bankruptcy without congressional approval, and can't escape federal laws it has no say in creating. The colonial relationship is economic too. The Jones Act of 1920 requires all goods shipped between US ports, including to Puerto Rico, to be transported on US-built, US-operated and US-crewed ships. This makes everything in Puerto Rico more expensive. Economists estimate the Jones Act cost Puerto Rican economy $1.5 billion annually. Then there's the debt crisis. Puerto Rico accumulated over $70 billion in debt, partly because it lost federal tax incentives that had attracted manufacturing, leading to economic collapse. When Puerto Rico couldn't pay, Congress created the Financial Oversight and Management Board, an unelected committee of 7 people who control Puerto Rico's budget. Puerto Ricans call it La Junta, echoing colonial juntas through Latin American history. The board has cut pensions, closed schools, privatized services, all without Puerto Ricans having any electoral power to remove them. It's taxation without representation with a 21st century twist. And let's not forget Hurricane Maria in 2017. The storm nearly killed 3,000 people, a death toll that was undercounted for months. The federal response was catastrophically slow compared to responses in Florida or Texas. President Trump literally threw paper towels at hurricane survivors like he was shooting hoops. Why the disparity? Because Puerto Ricans are seen as less American, despite being citizens. The colonial relationship means They're perpetually foreign in their own country.
Puerto Rico is just one of many U.S. territories, including the U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, the Northern Mariana Islands, and Guam.
Now let's hop across the Pacific to Guam, American Samoa, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, Americans' other colonies that most Americans couldn't find on a map. Guam has been a U.S. territory since 1898, and it's been militarized ever since. About 30% of the island is controlled by US military bases. The indigenous Chamorro people have no real autonomy. They're American citizens but can't vote for president. They serve in the US military at higher rates than almost any state. Guam has sent soldiers to every American war since World War I, yet they have no voice in decisions about war and peace. During World War II, Japan occupied Guam. The Chamorro people suffered horrific atrocities. When the US retook the island, you'd think there would be gratitude and recognition. Instead, the US Navy seized vast amounts of private land through eminent domain for bases, often paying pennies on the dollar.
American Samoa, located over 7,000 miles from our nation's capital. It's the only US soil south of the equator, home to tropical fruit bats and colorful crabs. The pristine coral reefs here are some of the best in the world. The island's remoteness has also helped preserve its way of life.
American Samoa is even stranger. American Samoans are US nationals, not citizens. The only people born on US soil denied birthright citizenship. They can live and work in the United States, but can't vote even if they move to a state until they naturalize, and they face restrictions on federal employment. Why? The rationale involves protecting Fa Samoa, Samoan culture, especially communal land ownership, which some fear could be challenged if full citizenship brought all constitutional protections. But critics note this paternalistic argument assumes Samoans can't protect their own culture, and it's the same logic used to deny rights to other territories.
Ever since 1978, Saipan, part of the Northern Mariana Islands in the western Pacific Ocean, has been a commonwealth of the U.S. The islands have been inhabited by humans for thousands of years.
The Northern Mariana Islands became a U.S. commonwealth in 1978, and their story is dark. Through the 1990s and 2000s, the island hosted garment factories where Chinese workers labored in sweatshop conditions, sometimes in forced labor situations, to make clothing with Made in USA labels, while being exempt from federal minimum wage and immigration laws. It was a corporate exploitation loophole dressed up as economic development.
Time. It has a different meaning in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It goes backwards, forwards, it stops.
End of a 50-year negotiation, the United States purchases the Virgin Islands. It's 1917, and the Danish West Indies becomes America's territory as a result of purchase details begun in 1867.
The US Virgin Islands, purchased from Denmark in 1917 for $25 million in gold, remained economically dependent on tourism and federal transfers. Residents are US citizens, but, like other territories, they cannot vote for president and have no voting representation in Congress. So, how are people in these territories fighting back? In Puerto Rico, the independence movement has deep roots. The Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, led by Pedro Campos, fought for independence in the 1930s and 1950s, facing brutal repression. The Ponce Massacre of 1937 saw police kill 19 unarmed protesters. In 1950, nationalists staged an armed revolt. The US bombed and strafed the town of Jayuya with fighter planes. Yes, the US bombed its own citizens. Today's independence movement is less militant, but no less committed. Organizations like the Movimiento Unión Soberanista advocate for sovereignty through political organizing and internal appeals to the United Nations Decolonization Committee. The problem? Status referendums are complicated. Puerto Rico has held multiple plebiscites, but they're plagued with low turnout, boycotts and confusing wording. The 2017 referendum showed 97% for statehood, but only 23% of voters participated because independence and Commonwealth supporters boycotted. Meanwhile, statehood supporters argued it's the only way to equality. Commonwealth supporters want enhanced autonomy, and independence supporters want to break free entirely. The colonial status creates a paralysis where change seems impossible. In Guam, the indigenous Chamorro people have sought self-determination through a proposed political status plebiscite. But here's the catch. They wanted only native Chamorros to vote, since they're the only ones who were colonized. A federal court struck this down as racial discrimination, creating a legal paradox. How did the colonized people decolonize if the colonizers' descendants can outvote them? The Chamorro activist group Nación Chamorro continues pushing for independence, arguing that Guam's military occupation violates international law.
Oh, this is not America, this is Polynesia. Our country was stolen. That's one of your problems. You're ignorant, woefully ignorant. You think you are in America. You are not in America. You are in a colony that is in Polynesia that was forcibly taken. Well, the bad United States of America took Puerto Rico, it took Alaska, it stole Indian land, it took Hawaii, it took Guam, it took Micronesia, Palau, because you are the recipient of an imperialist tradition.
In Hawaii, the sovereignty movement takes multiple forms. Some activists want restoration of the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent nation. Others support a nation within a nation model similar to Native American tribal sovereignty. The Native Hawaiian Royal Commission attempted to create a registry of Native Hawaiians to form a governing body, but it's been controversial and divisive. What unites these movements is a recognition that the current colonial status is unsustainable and unjust. As Wanani K. Trask, the late Hawaiian sovereignty leader, wrote, "We are not Americans. We will die as Hawaiians. We will never be Americans."
We are not American. We will die as Hawaiians. We will never be Americans.
Now, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with Venezuela? American imperialism doesn't stop at its formal colonies. The same logic that allowed the US to colonize Puerto Rico and Hawaii has driven interventions across Latin America for over a century, including in Venezuela. The Monroe Doctrine of 1823 essentially declared the Western Hemisphere America's sphere of influence. Throughout the 20th century, this meant supporting coups against democratically elected governments, invading countries and imposing economic sanctions when governments challenged US corporate interests. Venezuela, with the world's largest proven oil reserves, has been in Washington's crosshairs, especially since Hugo Chavez began nationalizing resources and distributing wealth in the early 2000s.
¡Váyanse al carajo, yanquis de mierda! ¡Que aquí hay un pueblo digno! ¡Aquí hay un pueblo digno, yanquis de mierda! ¡Váyanse al carajo 100 veces! ¡Aquí estamos, los hijos de Bolívar! ¡Los hijos de Guaycaipuro! ¡Los hijos de Tupac Amaru!
The US supported a coup attempt against Chavez in 2002 and has imposed devastating economic sanctions since 2017 that economists estimate have killed tens of thousands of Venezuelans by restricting access to medicine and food. The colonial mindset says, our resources matter more than your sovereignty. Whether it's Puerto Rico's Jones Act or Venezuela's oil sanctions, it's the same logic. I've made a deep dive into US-Venezuela relations and the history of intervention in another video. It's a story that connects directly to the imperial framework we're discussing here. So why should you care about America's colonies in 2026? First, because of human rights. Millions of people live under government they didn't elect and can't vote out. That's fundamentally anti-democratic. If you believe in self-determination, the principle that people have the right to choose their own government, then you have to oppose colonialism, whether it's British, French, or American. Second, because climate change is making this urgent. Puerto Rico and the Pacific territories are on the front lines of hurricanes, rising seas, and climate disasters. Yet they have no power to shape federal climate policy or disaster response. When the next hurricane hits, will we see another catastrophic failure like Maria? Third, because militarism. Guam is central to US military strategy in the Pacific, especially regarding tensions with China.
Let's say China. 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 You go over to China. 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 You take China.
China.
China. I love them. China. 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 I have to have my China. China. China because China. 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 China.
The people of Guam might find themselves in the front lines of a war they had no vote in starting. The same applies to Hawaii, which remains heavily militarized despite being a state. And finally, because solidarity matters, the struggles in Puerto Rico, Guam, Hawaii and beyond are connected to anti-colonial movements globally, in West Papua, Western Sahara, Palestine, and yes, in Latin American nations resisting US intervention. When we understand these connections, we can build international movements for justice. America's empire hides in plain sight. It's the territories marked as unincorporated on maps. in the military bases scattered across the Pacific, in the legal doctrines written by racist judges in 1901 that still apply today. It's in the Chamorro grandmother on Guam who watches fighter jets roar over her ancestral land. It's in the Puerto Rican student who can't vote for president but can be drafted to war. It's in the Hawaii activist who knows their kingdom was stolen and wants it back. The United States has never confronted its colonial legacy. Not seriously. There's been no reckoning, no truth and reconciliation, no material restitution. Just the quiet continuation of empire, rebranded as territories and possession. But people are fighting back. From San Juan to Honolulu, movements for decolonization persist. They're demanding what should have been theirs all along, the right to self-determination. So the next time someone tells you America doesn't have colonies, you'll know better. And maybe, just maybe, you'll join the fight to end them. Because if we truly believe in freedom, we have to believe in it for everyone, not just the people who look like us or live within the 50 states. Decolonization isn't a metaphor, it's a necessity.
Y aquí está mi deber. Yo nací aquí. Y yo soy de la carne de cada uno de vosotros. Yo soy del espíritu de cada uno de vosotros.